Welcome to another episode of Your Life Simplified. I'm Scott Sturgeon, and on today's episode, we're going to be taking, I think, an interesting kind of conversation about not only kind of where we are, from a societal perspective, but how does that directly influence our health? And I think on top of that, how does our diet and kind of our lifestyle and our nutritional needs ebb and flow and change with kind of maybe outside stressors that we're experiencing, or kind of what's going on in the world around us? How does that impact, our diet and that sort of thing? So our guest today to kind of help us unpack this, I'm excited to have her on, is Sheri Stinson. Sheri's a registered dietitian. And Sheri, I think probably the best way to start would be maybe if you wouldn't mind just kind of giving a brief introduction about kind of yourself and your background.
Okay, sure. Thank you for having me. Well, I guess I will start with kind of my career. Well, I started off at the University of Oklahoma, kind of not really knowing much about nutrition. Took my first nutrition class and was like, oh, so there's actually a profession that you learn the science of nutrition and you can help people and work in hospitals. 30 years ago, that really wasn't, full front and center like in today's world. A lot of college-age kids are wanting to either be a PA or they're wanting to study nutrition. And it's just amazing. Everywhere I look, or people come up to me and say, well, how do I get into it? But I will go back to myself. After graduating from the University of Oklahoma, I attended Massachusetts General Harvard Teaching Hospital and did an internship for a year. And that allowed me to be eligible to take the national boards to become a registered dietitian. My career, I have worked in the food service industry. I've worked as a clinical dietitian. I've also worked in long-term care as a consulting dietitian. And recently, I've been involved with sports nutrition and children's weight maintenance. And I've also helped with some professional ballet dancers.
Wow, kind of the full full spectrum of individuals and stages of life. That's really cool. Do you think in dealing with kind of those different patient populations or individuals, how do you think that's kind of influenced your views on nutrition and diets and that sort of thing?
I guess what I kind of take for granted that I kind of sometimes think people know more than they do know. And when you sit down and talk to them and start peeling back the layers, it's really giving them the tools and the education that they need to make smarter choices in their daily lives. In fact, some of the changes that you're recommending to the individual, based on sports or based on weight maintenance, they're pretty simple things that people could start doing in their diet.
That makes total sense. I maybe that's kind of a good segue. One of the questions, we kind of talked about before our recording. So in your experience, over several years, just in general, what do you think are some of the most common errors you see people making when it comes to their overall health and nutrition?
I kind of think one of the most prominent and biggest error I experience is people set unrealistic goals. They want to lose, say, 40 pounds, but they have a 2-month window for whatever reason. They're, going to a wedding, they're going to a high school reunion. But basically, that is not a realistic goal. 2 months is really not going to get someone that great of a weight loss. It's very unhealthy. So people usually tend to start off on a good trajectory with eating right and exercising. But when they're not seeing those rapid changes, they throw the towel in, and the next thing you know, they're back to the way they were. And maybe what weight they did lose, they're starting to gain it all back and some more. And then the other things I'm seeing are people are, kind of wanting the latest and the greatest, and they're just jumping on the bandwagon to say the newest, greatest diet, not really knowing the science behind it. And down the road, for example, the high-fat, low-carb diet, we're finding that we've changed our cardio laboratory values. Instead of being, on a good trajectory with our cholesterol and our HDL, good cholesterol and bad cholesterol, those numbers are actually flipping, and they're setting themselves up for future risk for heart disease.
Wow. I think at the end of the day, it seems like it's much, as opposed to necessarily following a certain trend or, a certain, whatever the diet of the day is. It's much more of kind of a lifestyle approach. Would that be accurate to say that, I mean, that those you find success kind of
Yes,
in changing things in their life, it's an overall change to really just how they live their life?
exactly. A lifestyle change, meaning when you make the lifestyle change, you're learning all the tools, you're educating yourself, and it's an easier thing to own. There's no restrictions. There's no cravings, because you're learning, if I eat this, then this will happen. If I eat this thing that maybe isn't the greatest, hey, you know what? Tomorrow's a new day and I'm back to the same pattern of eating. I'm allowing for myself to recognize I have those cravings, maybe succumb to them, but know that it's not the end all be all. And I've ruined everything I'm working toward. You should be looking at what is your future longevity versus a number on a scale or appearance. Those are great things, to have. But at the end of the day, what's going to get you into longer life where you're healthy and vibrant and not having major illnesses or chronic diseases that are debilitating?
Sure. Certainly, I have to imagine harder to do than you might think, but that has to be the value, I think. One of the huge value adds of working with a dietitian, just in general, is kind of tracking that over time. Again, with keeping that kind of end goal in mind. That's probably
Exactly.
accurate?
Yes. I mean, I kind of, with my children growing up, they would always ask me questions, and I kind of never talked about weight. I have daughters, so I was always very conscious of not setting up that whole vicious cycle of eating and, potentially eating disorders and disordered eating. So I'd always bring it back to, well, what you eat today will predict how long the body that you were given will last and how healthy. It's similar to like a car. You're not going to put in, if you had a very nice sports performance car, you're not going to put in the wrong type of fuel. You're not going to, put in the most economic oil. You're going to maintain it versus, because you want that sports car to maintain its value and its performance.
For sure.
Just like your body. What you put in your body is basically what you're going to get out.
Yeah.
In regards to energy and everything.
Yeah, that makes total sense. To switch gears just a little bit, one of the things, I wanted to make sure we touched on was, obviously we're kind of in a weird time, I think, right now in our society's kind of history. It's been many, many decades since we had kind of a pandemic situation like we're dealing with right now. And so, I think there's a lot of discussion, not only on obviously the health concerns that people have in potentially contracting the virus, but also just about the kind of the mental toll, and then maybe like a physical challenge of maybe being kind of quote unquote stuck at home or eating at home a lot more than we used to. And so maybe the challenges that kind of come with that. So what do you think are some kind of best practices you've maybe witnessed or experienced, or kind of suggest that people be considerate of, as we kind of navigate this kind of time frame?
Staying healthy and making sure we have a robust immune system in this day and age is kind of critical. And there are many ways, when you eat at home, basically you're going to be more cautious of your food choices. So ways to avoid that would be, to have things in your home from the grocery. And once you get them home, pre-prep your food so that it's readily available, that you say you need vegetables. Well, on Sunday, you cut the vegetables and they're in the refrigerator and they're ready to go to throw into whatever you're making. You can do the same thing with protein. You can cook meats and dried beans ahead of time and then individually portion them and put them in the refrigerator, and then you have those ready at hand just to toss in. You can buy convenience items like canned beans. You can do frozen vegetables. They're just as nutritious as fresh. You can also, the grocery store has convenience of, for example, pre-cut vegetables, butternut squash. Those are all things that help you to put together a meal that is more nutritionally sound and meets your needs for nutrients that your body needs during this kind of time of watching our immune system and making sure we have everything we need to help fight off a virus or the flu. You could also, if you're making, say, stir fry or chili, you could double your recipe and then take some of that and freeze it and have it for later. And another thing, it's interesting is I take for granted because of my background, you learn to cook, you learn the principles of food. A lot of people don't know how to cook. They're not comfortable. Ask for help. Look into getting some instructions. And there are studies that say that the more instructions that a person has, they're more confident in their food preparation. Therefore, they're making better choices and they're eating better. And one study I did read, which is really interesting, if you have children that are involved in meal preparation ate one more serving of vegetables and fruits compared to children that never helped. So that
like one a day?
Really, yeah. Well, they ate one more of vegetable and one more of fruit compared to their peers who probably didn't. And they're become more aware of the foods in their environment. And, it's a good learning tool kind of to know about the different fruits and different vegetables and what they taste like. I do know there's a organization here. It's a nonprofit, Global Gardens. And when you watch their promotional videos, you see that the children are growing vegetables in a garden. And then they go inside and they cook the vegetables that they never have ever seen. They've never tasted. And they're so proud. And it just kind of inspires them to want more and to want to learn more about healthy food choices.
Yeah. That's really cool. And obviously a better understanding of what the things they're putting into their body, which is so important. I'll show somewhat of my ignorance here in putting together a meal plan or kind of preparing for meals in general. My wife and I, for example, have found there's really good blogs on the internet that kind of have healthy options for a lot of maybe the classic dishes that you're familiar with, which I feel like has been good for us. But in general, when if you're just the lay individual trying to kind of put together a meal for a family or for yourself or what have you, you hear the term balanced diet or the phrase balanced diet mentioned a lot. But what does that actually mean? Are there certain kind of goals that we're looking for, whether it's a portion of carbs and fiber and protein? Is there kind of a breakdown or a rule on that? Any kind of best practices you have?
So the U.S. Dietary Guidelines right now recommend eating healthy pattern of combining healthy choices from across all food groups and paying attention to calorie limits. So basically, you might have your caloric needs are definitely higher than your wife's are going to be. So you want to pay, kind of some particular attention to portion sizes. The meal should, of carbohydrates, which are starches and grains, 50 to 60% of carbohydrates, about 25% protein. And I would say, I'm just kind of out of my head, 15% fat and 10 fat. And those guidelines kind of help you kind of understand where you're at, but there's really an easy way to go about putting a meal together is taking a protein source, and probably your wife would take like the size of a fist and you would maybe take two sizes, and then a size of a palm for some type of grain like quinoa, rice, and then vegetable, the size of a palm. And for men, typically you would want to probably increase those portion sizes compared to a woman who's probably going to do just a single protein, single vegetable, and single starch.
Interesting.
And easy way to throw them together, if you have them, like frozen rice, can of black beans, pre-washed salad, tomatoes, oil and vinegar, kind of put those all together. And that's a complete meal. Same with, 3 ounces of chicken for a woman, 5 ounces for a man, quinoa, brown rice, and some type of vegetable.
Yeah. And all relatively straightforward and simple, I think. I like the fist and kind of the palm is like a nice, obviously it's something that's readily, discernible, and you can somewhat eyeball it, if you will. That's a great, a great point.
And then, trying to avoid ultra processed foods, which are foods that are not in their natural state, meaning they have things added to them like salt, sugars, artificial flavors, and staying more to the source of your food. Just staying closer to how it comes out of the ground has shown to be a lot healthier choice than having something that your body's not really sure exactly what all those additives and things are.
Right. Yeah, that makes total sense.
Thanks again for downloading this episode of Your Life Simplified, which is produced by Mariner Wealth Advisors. And at Mariner Wealth Advisors, we're here to serve as your advocate. We help people chart a course to reach their personal and financial goals so that they can have greater peace of mind that may lead to a more fulfilling life. We do this by always putting our clients first. Because as fiduciaries, we're required to provide guidance that's in the best interest of clients, not in the best interest of a company or shareholders or anyone else. So as you listen to this podcast and have questions about maybe your own financial situation, or would simply like a second opinion, or even you have an idea for a future podcast, please go ahead and email us at podcast@marinerwealthadvisors.com. If you found the information on this podcast valuable, please go ahead and share it with a friend or family member that you think might benefit from this information. And please don't forget to subscribe to this podcast so you don't miss an episode. Thanks for listening, and now back to the episode.
I think we had talked about this earlier. I think this was your phrasing, not mine, and I really liked it. It was quote unquote how not to diet. So, when we think about like the lifestyle changes that can be really helpful to making sure that you're living a really healthy lifestyle. When you think about how not to diet, is it kind of a continuation around just making those overall choices we talked about, or are there specific things, kind of on top of that maybe people should be mindful of, whether it's sleep or like you kind of mentioned, eating things out of the ground is better than something that's ultra processed. So kind of something eating closer to the source, if you will. Do you kind of have thoughts around that at all?
Well, there's a lot of press right now around actually the Mediterranean diet or plant-based, plant-forward diet. And, there's lots of studies that are saying, a study out of New England Journal of Medicine, the Mediterranean diet has shown to reduce the risk of heart attacks, stroke, and death related to heart problems by 30%. The Mediterranean diet, which has been around for a long time, since the 1950s, and it was typically the way in Mediterranean area, southern Italy, Greece, people were eating for years and they noticed there was no heart disease. So we kind of have this pattern of eating that incorporates vegetables, fruits, grains, minimal olive oil, and minimal nuts and seeds, and then you kind of meat or fish, and then minimal amounts of chicken and minimal amounts of red meat. And we kind of have incorporated that, and every year the Mediterranean diet has stood the test of time. It's been the number one diet for the U.S. News and World Report for many years. In fact, this year, the dietary guidelines are due to change. Every 5 years, the United States, the dietary guidelines change. And the panel of experts have suggested a Mediterranean-based, plant-based diet as one of their recommendations for being implemented into the dietary guidelines.
So, yeah, definitely. Short of moving to the south of France or Italy, which I think would be fantastic. Right. So kind of focusing on those, incorporating fish, lots of vegetables, and like kind of like we talked about fruits and vegetables, and really
picking colors, picking a rainbow, and they're the same, picking a rainbow, so that you're getting all the nutrients that in protective, antioxidant, phytonutrients that, plants and fruits and vegetables offer. Not, Mediterranean or total plant-based. There's many ways you can go, but I think the focus is getting away from our heavily processed, manipulated foods and eating more of a, kind of how our ancestors ate, from the land.
Sure. Makes total sense.
Yeah. And as for other health things, sleep is a huge, huge, huge part of our health and wellness. There's this rule, less than 7, more than 9. And across the board, if you're less than 7 hours of sleep or you're more than 9 hours of sleep, mortality from anything is greater. I mean, there's so many things that lack of sleep has caused learning, new information to be hard. It's hard for us to regulate our emotions. We make poor food choices, and we tend to eat high fat, high processed calories. Therefore, we're at risk of becoming overweight and obese. Some researchers even suggest that not getting enough sleep makes your brain more sensitive to food stimuli like seeing it or smelling it, it makes, and then when you finally have it, it's so much more rewarding. So of course you're going to overeat and gravitate towards, those types of foods and set yourself up for risk. There's research that it affects our metabolic rate, then, how many calories we need to maintain. So therefore, if we're lowering our metabolic rate, we're not going to actually burn calories like we were before, which sets us up for weight gain and other issues. And one study showed that deficient sleep is connected to a decreased HDL, which is the good cholesterol, and an increase in your bad cholesterol.
Wow.
And of course, you were talking about stress. And so we're seeing that lack of sleep can also increase stress for people. And some studies even show the stress of the people, they have less empathy for other people. That's interesting.
That is really interesting.
But another component, which goes with health and wellness and, maintaining a healthy lifestyle, is exercise. What type of exercise we should be doing: aerobics, strength training, stretching, and balance exercises. And trying to aim for 150 minutes per week of moderate intensity, not all out, hard type of aerobic exercise. And at least, there's studies that show, especially for women, strength training 2 to 3 times a week helps with our, of course, we all lose muscle mass as we age, but it helps with your bones and maintaining strong bones as we, go into later life.
Wow. So about 30 minutes a day, give or take, is kind of the goal for that.
Yes. Yeah. For the strength training, you can do cardio, which actually at some point we start to see where cardio starts to tear down our muscle mass. So by doing the strength training, you're kind of preventing that accelerated rate of muscle, utilizing your muscle for other energy production.
Right. So again, kind of that balance, if you will, not necessarily focusing on one type or the other, but finding a good middle ground for both types.
Yes, exactly.
Makes total sense.
Another component that really had a lot of press lately is fiber. We don't eat, the recommendations for fiber basically are for women 25 grams and for a man 38. As Americans, we're probably half that. And they're seeing that fiber, aside from helping with cholesterol, because it basically, you eat fiber and your body can't absorb it, so it goes right through. So it helps the whole process with eliminating things from your diet that are circulating in the blood. We're seeing that the microbiome, which is the bacteria in your gut, there's a lot of study right now, and it's in its infancy, but it's a growing field, and they're learning so much more than I think we've known in the past about how our gut health is very important for the health of our whole entire body. Mm-hmm. But if you don't have adequate fiber, which we're talking above that 25 gram threshold, the healthy bacteria in your gut doesn't have its food source. So therefore, the bad bacteria will take over, or we can trigger an immune response because our body is thinking that the good bacteria, but it's not producing a component that it needs to help quiet our immune system. Our immune system comes in and starts eating our good bacteria as well and causing inflammation. So it's, very important that we even focus on fiber.
Wow. It's so crazy that all of these things can be so interrelated to one another, that sleep influences exercise and empathy, the foods that we crave, that, fiber consumption can then influence what our cholesterol is like, which is going to impact maybe what medications we're on, or kind of the dietary changes we need to make. So thank you so much for sharing all of that. I think it's so interesting to hear kind of the different relationships between all those different elements, and I guess levers we can pull kind of in our quest, if you will, for really good health. And
nutritional science is like any science. It's ever changing, ever evolving. For a while, coconut oil was bad, then it's good. Well, science is now saying, no, it's not good. It's changing. People that are using heavily focused coconut oil, when they're going into their doctor visit, they're seeing changes in their cholesterol levels and their LDL. The bad cholesterol is creeping up. So we're starting to see what was good was bad, was good was bad. And science just evolves that way. And we kind of have to be up with kind of educating ourselves and staying in the know of what's coming down the pipeline and what we're discovering, and maybe what we thought we were doing was good. Well, maybe now we need to reevaluate that and make some changes.
Yeah. So, and actually that's kind of a good, I think, kind of transition to kind of our last topic in just speaking of things on the rise, food sensitivities. This is one that kind of in our initial discussions came up, and I think it's a good one to touch on. But we see people with, whether it's digestive issues with certain types of foods or even kind of allergic reactions to certain kinds of foods. And really that all seems to be increasing. And so I guess I'm curious, do you think it is indeed an increase in patient populations? Are there external factors? Is it just better tracking and better awareness of kind of these things that are going on? And do you think maybe there's things that we should be doing proactively to avoid those kinds of those sensitivities?
So, after eating a certain food, there's a large population that are experiencing symptoms, and they're not food intolerances or food allergies, they're food sensitivities. And it's basically they're being exposed to some kind of food that might be creating an immune response. And some of the symptoms, they're not life-threatening like a food allergy, but you might experience joint pain, stomach pain, fatigue, rashes, or even brain fog. Gluten, gluten-free this, gluten-free that. And gluten has probably been the best known trigger of a food sensitivity. So the best way really to kind of know about a food sensitivity is, if you're having some of these symptoms, do some observation and experimentation to identify what certain foods are causing these symptoms. And then eliminate those foods from your diet for 2 to 4 weeks. I kind of don't think 2 weeks is enough. I usually would think 4 weeks. And then start reintroducing one item at a time. Say you just think you maybe have a gluten sensitivity. Don't use it for a month. Try really hard. And then reintroduce it and see if your symptoms come back. And so then yes, I have a food sensitivity to gluten. And what is causing that immune response? Is it, the way the food is being processed in this day and age, the way it's grown? There's also a body of evidence that it's the gut microbiome again. It's constantly changing. And, there's things in our diet that we can wipe out our good bacteria that's protective. For example, antibiotics, over-the-counter pain meds, certain non-nutritional sweeteners tend to wipe out the good bacteria. And so could some of these things be causing some of the immune response that we're seeing with certain foods? But as it said, our gut environment is constantly changing. So with kind of focus on that sensitivity, maybe, not putting it in your diet and letting it kind of fester and keep continually causing these symptoms, eliminate it, and then work on getting in, once again, a healthy food choices, lots of fiber, and then try and reintroduce it.
Makes total sense. Maybe with a food journal or something like that. Is that kind of the best way to go about it?
Yeah, I think so. I think it depends on how mindful you are of, your daily process and your body. For some people, writing down the triggers, some people do the bullet journaling where, you could on your calendar just kind of write stomach pain or, various things. And then maybe mark when, okay, I think that was XYZ, what I had last night. I'm going to try and eliminate that. And then if you really think you have a problem, say gluten, seek out a allergist or a doctor and see if maybe there is a blood test or even a skin test that you need to be doing to see if maybe there's a little bit more than just a sensitivity.
Huh. Yeah, that makes total sense. Well, Sheri, again, thank you so much. Really informative. And for all of our listeners, I feel like they've got to feel the same way. All of this is really, really helpful. So, at the end of our podcast, historically, we ask our guests, what's the biggest financial mistake they've ever made or the biggest financial lesson they've ever learned. But for you, I actually kind of feel like it might be more applicable to ask what, in your opinion, is the best dietary lesson you've ever learned or nutritional lesson that you've ever learned?
I kind of think I would have to say it kind of goes back to what we were talking about, and you mentioned it earlier, a lifestyle change. Being nutritionally aware and cautious of what I'm eating today affects me tomorrow, affects me in 20 years. And just kind of being more mindful of when I'm out and about and I'm really hungry and or I'm with friends, if are these bad choices going to derail me? Are they going to set me back? No, probably not. If I did it every day, yes, probably. But I think it's more about I'm taking on this mindset of eating healthy for longevity. So what are the components for that I need to implement, learn about, and kind of they become who I am and what I'm about. You kind of own it. And so you don't even really think anymore. I'm able to make my own choices because I know enough and I own the science and I own the information of why I'm doing the things I'm doing. I have this because you can do any diet in the world, but really you're just spinning your wheels, wasting time. And if you just, adapt a lifestyle, you really don't have to worry about restrictions and calorie levels and all these things. You're getting adequate nutrients. And so maybe you don't fill up to par. You might do some extra vitamin C or zinc but it's not like you're going to have these debilitating outcomes if you're conscious of what you're doing.
Oh, absolutely. And kind of hearing you speak through that, we at Mariner Wealth Advisors that's kind of what we do for clients is we're helping them kind of diagnose things that are going on in their lives today from more of a financial perspective, mind you.
Right.
But what can we be doing in the short term to really over the long term reach kind of a goal we're trying to reach or to ensure success for whatever they're trying to do. So
right.
Certainly an analogy there.
It's the same. Yeah, it's the same with the diet. It's like you're investing today for tomorrow.
Well, Sheri, thank you so much for taking the time today. This has been super informative, and really we really appreciated having you on the show.
Well, thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Well, again, thank you so much, and thank you so much to our listeners as well for taking the time out of your day to listen to our show. If you have feedback or thoughts or questions or suggestions, by all means, we really encourage you to reach out to us at podcast@marinerwealthadvisors.com. Thank you so much again for tuning in. Have a great day.
Wealth Advisors, or MWA, is an SEC registered investment advisor with its principal place of business in the state of Kansas. Registration of an investment advisor does not imply a certain level of skill or training. MWA is in compliance with the current notice filing requirements imposed upon registered investment advisors by those states in which MWA maintains clients. MWA may only transact business in those states in which it is notice filed or qualifies for an exemption or exclusion from notice filing requirements. Any subsequent direct communication by MWA with a prospective client shall be conducted by a representative that is either registered or qualifies for an exemption or exclusion from registration in the state where the prospective client resides. For additional information about MWA, including fees and services, please contact MWA or refer to the Investment Advisor Public Disclosure website at www.advisorinfo.sec.gov. Please read the disclosure statement carefully before you invest or send money.